Ruthie, it's all for you now. Ruthie, can you hear us?
Okay, there we go. Perfect. I was muted there for a second. Hi, y'all. Welcome. Thanks for having me today. In general, we're going to be talking about how, in honor of teen dating violence prevention, we're going to be talking about how to address healthy relationships with teens in general. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about social media and how to address some of the concerns around sexting and things with social media and how to talk with teens about that. We really want to be focused on what are effective conversations, what are teens telling us are effective for them, and informing you with what teens say, and so you know that how you're talking with young people is in line with what they're saying that they need. So with that in mind, there we go. Again, I'm the training manager at Colorado Youth Matter. My name is Ruthie Cole. I have a background in being a high school math and physics teacher, which then very naturally transitioned into sex ed, as I think all math and physics teachers do. But really, the way that transition happened was that when I was teaching math, I would be standing there and have a room full of students who had so many other conversations that they were needing to have, and nobody was having them with them. Nobody was talking about how they make decisions about relationships or how they navigate the world as an adult. And there was only so much that I could do as a math teacher in those conversations. And I discovered that as you get into health and sexual health in particular, you really got to have those conversations and bolster youth up to become decision-making adults. And I have not looked back. It's been quite fun. Never dull. So at Colorado Youth Matter, we are a statewide nonprofit that focuses on strengthening leadership and advancing the movement for youth sexual health. We do that through education, which is things like right now where we work with partners out in the community who are serving youth, and we help them have conversations with youth that are effective about sexuality. Then we also sometimes go out and also facilitate sexual health education with young people as well. So we do education, we do and training, we do research. So for example, last year we did focus groups across the state talking with youth and adults, parents and administrators about sexting. What were their practices? What did they need support with? What was actually happening out in the field, if you will, around sexting, and so that it informs the sexual health education that we bring to youth. And then we also do advocacy. So at times we've had more or less advocacy ability given funding streams that we have. But for example, every year we do what we call Youth Action Day, which this year is going to be in April, where youth come to the Capitol and we talk to them about what are the different policies that would affect their sexual health decisions, and then we let them go out and talk to their own policymakers, advocating for themselves on what they need and making sure that the policies that are created that affect them have their voice in mind or have at least heard from them before. So that is Colorado Youth Matter and who I am. To give you an idea, basically we want you to be able to have conversations about healthy relationships and sexuality with young people in your lives. That's the overarching goal that we have. Specifically, we'd like for you to be able to have better informed and comprehensive conversations about healthy relationships, pleasure, and online safety. We would love for you to be able to name at least one teachable moment to use when talking with teens about relationships and sexual health, and then to take at least one step toward improving the rights of teens for safe relationships. And that is both in person and online. And to give you an idea, whenever we are having conversations, this is our structure upon which everything is built. So we believe really strongly in having a positive youth development framework. That is, that we are looking at, we need to be strengths-based, that we need to be focusing on where our teens, what are the skills that we're developing in them, as opposed to thinking about like, oh, they are, little balls of risk that are flying through the air, instead of being like, they are strong future adults that we can help build their strengths instead of trying to constantly look at them as a deficit, which is sometimes how particularly sexual health programming can go. And so we also want to be inclusive. We want to be collaborative. So we want to make sure that we are listening to the voices of all youth, and not just the youth that are in places of power, that we're reaching all youth and all of their needs, that we're talking to them and we're hearing what they need and responding to that and not making assumptions about what they need. And we have to do this in a way that's sustainable, in a way that will continue, that they will continue to get services whether or not we have safe funding, or that there are multiple different parts of their lives that are supporting their sexual health and their sexual development. So we have a positive youth development framework as we're talking with youth about sexuality, and we also have a comprehensive sexual health education framework. That is that if youth are given full information, medically accurate information, and they have access to resources, and then they are able to develop skills such as decision-making skills and communication skills, et cetera, that they will make informed decisions for themselves. And so we really believe in not withholding information from youth and not trying to hide information from youth. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit more about being age appropriate, but that it's really important that youth know that adults in their lives will give them honest answers about sexuality. So this is the framework through which we try to see all aspects of sexuality in youth's lives. In a webinar I did last year, we brought up sexting at this point because something that we noticed as we were talking with partners around sexting is that it's very easy for us to have a positive youth development, or it's not very easy, but often people have a positive youth development or a comprehensive sex ed approach to sexuality in general. But we started noticing this pattern around sexting that where people who are otherwise like, yes, we need to talk about, we need to talk fully about the risks and the rewards and pleasure and all these other things around sexuality in general. When it came to sexting, adults, it became this perfect, what's what I'm looking for, juxtaposition of teens and sexuality in media that just caused moral panic. People just unable to cope with the like, oh, teens, media, sex, this is more than we can do, so just don't do it. We're just going to take an abstinence approach. We're not going to talk about it. We just need to tell teens not to do it. And we realized that, like, wait a second, we need to back up. What's actually going on here? Where are we? Why is the framework that we look at all other aspects of sexuality breaking down around sexting, and what can we do about that? And so I think every time there's a little bit something different in the way that culture and media, teens intersect to navigate sexuality, adults tend to suddenly flip back into panic mode and it's really important for us every time that happens to like go back and tether back into like what really is happening here, and is this any different than what was around when I was a teen? And so that gives them background on sort of how we're going to be approaching technology throughout the webinar. So I'm going to be doing a couple polls in here. I'm attempting to do a couple polls in here. We'll see how they go. Using Poll Everywhere. And so in order for that to work, I need you to get out your phones and send a message so that you're like logged into my polling. Send a message to the number 22333, and then the message text should be Ruthie Kolb 303. So I'm going to give you guys a second to do that. A message to 22333, and then the message text is Ruthie Kolb 303. So on the next screen, we can have a poll that works for everybody. All right, so you should still have, all right, so you can still see the text and the message number. But if you can please send in your response. What do you think teens report as the greatest influence on their decisions about sex? All right, we are strongly weighted for peers, some media here, some celebrities. Awesome. Oh, it's full. Okay, well, thanks. I'm sorry, thanks for everybody who responded, but I think this gives us a good idea of what sort of responses we have out there, what is the common opinion. And so now I'm going to show you through the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. This is what teens reported their largest influences on their decisions about sex. And this is my little bit of bolstering you up that I think oftentimes we're like, teens aren't listening. We are talking about healthy relationships, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about health in general, and we just feel like they're not listening, that we're dealing with a wall. And the truth is that when we look at, particularly if you combine religious leaders, teachers, and parents together, that it's about 57% of all adults that are the greatest influence on decisions about sex for teens. And I think that's really encouraging to us. And in fact, furthermore, whenever we talk with young people, they are very frequently saying, I really just need adults to talk to me. And so we need to talk about how we talk to youth about sex and about their decisions, but they're listening. So know that, be encouraged that they are listening. So now I'm going to have you chat in, if you could type into the chat box. Imagine that you are having an incredibly stressful day, or just like things are going on at work, things are going on at home, you are just highly elevated and you need to talk to somebody, or you're trying to deal with this. I would like for you to chat in, what are the characteristics of the people where you're like, please do not call me. Please do not show up in the grocery store line. I just need this person to not be there right now. If you could write a few descriptors of what the person that you do not want in your life when you are stressed or having a difficult time or dealing with hard decisions, if you could type in to the chat box, what are some characteristics of those people that are just too much to have in your life when you're stressed? All right, so I'm looking at the chat. Just chat in what your experience is. Oops. So for some reason, I'm not getting any chats here, so I'm suspicious that in some way I am not able to see the chat. So I don't know if the CCASA staff can see the chat and could sort of read off the things that they're seeing from the chat box.
Yes, our list is self-centered, fake, judgmental, negative people, self-absorbed, judgmental, critical, selfish, unempathetic, disrespectful, overbearing, self-centered, needy, talkative, negative, narcissistic people, negative and judgmental, people who talk a lot about themselves and wait for their turn to talk instead of just listening, negative, needy, unsolicited advice givers, annoying,
awesome.
Gossipy, negative, folks who talk more than listen, possessive, jealous, controlling.
Awesome. That sounds like a pretty good list. Thank you. Thanks for reading that off. Yeah, so these are the people we don't want to show up in our lives. This is how we need to not have people be present when we're in difficult times. And so now that we've thought through that, I'm going to have us do another little thought process. So on those days, who are the people what are the characteristics of the people that you do want in your life? How do you want people to show up when you're in a stressful or difficult situation, making a hard decision? What are those things that you need from other people? It might be the opposite of what you typed in before, and it might be something a little bit different, because it's not always just the opposite of negative that we need. So what are the things that we need?
All right, our list is empathetic listeners, mindful, caring, fun, happy, supportive, kindness, empathetic, non-judgmental, empathetic, present both physically and emotionally, good listeners, listening, open, non-judgmental, positive, supportive, empathetic, genuine, folks who are thoughtful and empathetic, compassionate, and full of hope, input when asked for, kindness, genuine, honest, hugs, empathetic, active listening, able to offer advice in a positive manner, someone to just listen.
Yeah, thank you. So perhaps not surprisingly, when we talk with teens, they are looking for very similar things as what we look for when they're trying to make decisions and when they're trying to deal with the world around them and talk about their relationships. And so I really want to encourage you, one, listen to the list of the same things, non-judgmental, open. They need listening. They need people to not try to fix them. They want people to not be shaming of them. They talk about empathetic as well. They want somebody who is present with them. They want someone who doesn't tell them what to do. And they also talk about wanting someone who's not shocked when they're talking about sexuality and relationships. And so I think it's kind of interesting because teens are they're in that transition from childhood to adulthood. And sometimes when we're talking about sex and relationships, we tend to revert backward a little bit and treat them more like children, where in their relationship decisions, that's one of the places where they're emerging really strongly as adults. And we need to really be fostering the same sort of conversations that we would have with our friends or that we would need from our friends. If we were making a difficult relationship decision, we need to be fostering the same sort of space for young people. We need to be showing up for them in the same way, in ways that are non-judgmental, that are opening, that we're actively listening more than we're speaking, that we draw out information from them instead of telling them the things that we know. Yes, so as we talk with teens, they are asking for the same sort of presence that we as adults already know we need when we're in similar situations. To borrow from Al Vernaccio, who says, what if the teens really believed that the adults in their lives wanted them to have a good sex life? We tend to try to protect them and try to make their world smaller and withhold information and withhold experiences from them. And not to say that we should be pushing them out to have experiences, but what if they really believed that by the way that we showed up, the way that we encouraged them, that we really wanted them at whatever point it was appropriate for them to make the decision to have a positive sexual experience in life. That we were not trying to keep them from something or hide something from them or control them in any way, but we were trying to bring them toward their best healthy selves as adults. Because the idea is that we really want to be strengthening them in order for their adulthood. We want to be helping them learn what are their decision-making skills and how will they apply these as they become more and more independent from the adults in their lives. So with that in mind, some things to avoid when we're talking with young people about healthy relationships and sexuality. One of the big ones is, and I'm sure a lot of people already know this, is the shoulds. And it's just so interesting how quickly they come out. But just like when we're talking with other fellow adults about our lives, we don't want someone telling us what we should do. We want someone empathizing and helping us problem solve. It's really easy for us to tell young people what we think they should do. And some words to just try to avoid, really obvious ones are like good and bad. Like, that's a good decision, that's a good person. That's a bad decision, that's a bad person. That's a good thing. Those sorts of words put a lot of judgment. Where we talked about how we want someone to show up when we're making a difficult decision, and one of the things we listed was non-judgmental. When we start labeling decisions and things with young people as good and bad, that starts to come off as really judgmental. And even more subtly, sometimes healthy and unhealthy. I know it's kind of ironic because here we are talking about healthy relationships, but sometimes even the usage of healthy and unhealthy can come off as judgmental, or just it becomes a difficult word. So for example, one of the things I like to, an illustration of this is that if I were to ask you, what is smoking 5 cigarettes a day a healthy behavior? Most people would be like, no, not at all. That's not a healthy behavior. And then if I were to say, okay, but what if I were smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and now I'm smoking 5? Is that a healthy behavior? And the answer is, yeah. Now that is comparatively, that's a healthy behavior. And so when we start talking to teens about things being healthy and unhealthy, just be aware of the way that you're using those words. And sometimes talking about something being safe, or talking about something being supportive, or talking about something feeling positive to them, use the words they use. And try to just try to be as encouraging as possible. Other things to think about is shame, and I know that we're adults that work with youth, but I even find like sometimes some words that come out as shaming still happen really easily, even for people who are long-term practitioners. One of the big ways is relationships. So often when adults talk about youth relationships, adults will talk about how temporary they are, how they're in a relationship this week, but they're going to be in a different relationship next week, how they don't really know what real love is, how we don't take their relationship experiences seriously. And that automatically means that we're in positions where when we're trying to have honest conversations with youth, we are breaking that trust in that relationship. And our conversations will just be less impactful as they would be if we took them seriously and at their word. That when they feel that this is love, that feeling is real to them, and we have to take them at their word. We have to trust them to be experts in their own experience, because, maybe, yeah, I'm not going to say anything else about that. Okay, and then similarly, be aware of how if we are shaming any sort of sexual activity, any time we start to say like kids these days, that's a little bit of my ears always perk up whenever I hear the phrase kids these days, because that's usually an indication of a way in which we are not really entering into and trying to understand the experience that youth are having. And as long as we're not trying to enter in and understand, we will have less effective conversations with them. And then finally, we often try to remove risk from life for teens. We want to remove things that could harm them from their lives. And my illustration of this is that if you reflect, if anyone out there is a parent or has spent time around a baby, or has been a caregiver of some sort, when you're with a small child, a baby has to get really, really angry to learn to walk. They have to be very frustrated. They have to fall down sometimes. You have to see people get up and walk away from you, and you have to fight with life until you're like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to follow that person and I'm going to figure it out. And similarly, youth are going to have to experience, they're going to have difficulty in life, just like adults have to as well. We have to get uncomfortable in order to make change. And so be aware of any time that you find yourself in conversations with young people where you're trying to remove experiences from them or take away choices, because those choices are part of how they are learning to be adults. And we want to try to remove some of the harm that those choices can cause for them. Absolutely. We do not want them hurt by life. Absolutely. But be aware of any time that it ends up stifling growth if you don't allow them to really struggle and have to make hard decisions, because that's part of becoming an adult. So now that we've talked a bit about the things that we shouldn't do, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we need to do in order to help young people have a better understanding of healthy relationships. And the first one is that we have to address pleasure. Historically, the U.S. has a very, very unhealthy relationship with pleasure. We're very afraid of talking about sex as being something that feels good. We're afraid that if we talk about sex in a positive way, that will cause young people to go out and have lots of sex and And we're afraid of, like, where are the circumstances in which we can even talk about pleasure. And but the truth is that we have to move beyond preventing rape, and we have to move toward having positive relationships and having consensual positive sexuality. We can't really educate youth on consent without educating on pleasure. So traditionally, in the sex ed world, originally people talked about consent as no means no. We are moving slowly toward affirmative consent, where only a sober and enthusiastic yes means yes. So in the sexual health world, but really when you look at consent, the basis of really good consent, beyond affirmative consent, beyond only yes means yes, consent is when sexual partners desire pleasure and value the pleasure of their partner. That is real consent. That is what we want. That is what healthy sexuality is. And so if we don't talk about that, they should, in order to engage in a sexual activity, they should desire pleasure and want pleasure for someone else. And that is consent. And I think it's really hard for us to acknowledge pleasure sometimes, but it is absolutely vital for us to be having conversations that change our social norms around sexual relationships and consent. It's also really important because, furthermore, to talk about sex as more than reproduction, as pleasurable, that people have sex for more reasons than just like sperm to egg, make a baby. I think sometimes in sex ed, it is very, very comfortable for us to talk about, like, yes, we can talk about reproduction, parts, functions. It's all nice and clean. It feels really comfortable. It's something people are even comfortable talking to young children about. Reproduction feels like, yes, we can talk about the functionality of sexuality. But the thing is that youth know that many adults have sex for reasons more than reproduction. In fact, I think youth are quite aware, the cat is out of the bag. Youth are quite aware that adults have sex because they want to, because they like it. And we have to really have conversations about that, and not just about the reproduction aspect, about what does it look like to want to and what does it look like to like it, so that we can also talk about what does it look like to not want to, and how do you identify when you don't like it. Also, if we need to talk beyond reproduction and about pleasure, because if we only talk reproduction, we are completely erasing the experience of LGBTQ youth. And we then are saying that their experience of sexuality isn't really sexuality and it doesn't matter. And that's a very harmful place for our society to be in. So we have to talk about pleasure with young people in order for them to understand what healthy and unhealthy sexuality looks like for them. The other thing we need to do is we need to talk early and often. I think sometimes we get into a rut of saying, like, oh, we're going to have this one conversation where we're going to discuss these things and then we're done. And we really have to work up to the tough conversations, and they have to start young. If we're having conversations about healthy sexuality and originally people were starting in college and talking about, okay, well, with college students we can talk about pleasure and healthy sexuality. And that's really too late. A lot of people experience harmful sexual experiences before then. We really have to be talking early about what is it how do you relate to your peers, what is it that you like, you can make affirmative consent status quo from a very young age around all sorts of interactions with peers. That if they're not liking it, or if you're not liking it, these things need to change. Be that in how you're playing, in hugging, in all sorts of arenas like that. And if you look on our website, if you're curious about what age-appropriate information is, we have guidelines for what is the sexual development of young people at different ages, and then what is appropriate information to pair with that development. And the thing is that young people experience vaginal lubrication and erections at before 2. So it is not unusual for them to need information at a young age, and in fact we need to be providing it at a younger age than we often are. In a non-shocking way, in an age-appropriate way, but that we need to be talking about their bodies and about how their bodies interact with the world and about relationships and friendships and giving permission for people to be in contact with your body at very young ages. And also we have to work up to having tough conversations. When I talk to youth, they often talk about how adults sort of have the talk, and they really need someone. They're like, at that point, it's just overwhelming. We have to work up to having the talk. We have to talk about their friendships. We have to talk about their other relationships. We have to be talking about having close conversations to work up to having open sexual health conversations and healthy relationships conversations. So find ways to have teachable moments in life. Find ways to talk about, for example, you can analyze relationships that they see in their lives. What are some of your friends' relationships that you see? What do you like about their relationships? What do you not like about their relationships? What is something you would change about the relationships that you see from adults in your lives? What is a celebrity relationship that you like? What do you like about it? What seems healthy about it? So start with less personal conversations, and then you can work into more personal conversations. And the early and often idea also spreads to using technology. It doesn't work as well. I mean, we find ourselves in non-ideal situations all the time. It's part of life. But talk about technology usage and how to interact with people on technology before you're in a situation where there's a problem. And talk openly about how do you use technology. What is a positive online presence that you would like to have that will get you what you would like in life? Can you start if you are interested in hair, can you start a blog about that, or a Twitter account, or an Instagram account? How can you get your voice heard via technology, and what are positive ways that you can use technology for your future? And so that we're not just addressing technology when we feel like something has gone wrong. The other thing we need to talk about, I touched on this a little bit before, but there's talking about healthy relationships. And one of the ways to do this is to analyze relationships in their lives before you get to analyzing their own relationship. So like I had talked about before, what are ways that you see adults interacting in positive ways in their relationships? What are things you'd change about a relationship that you know about? If you have a friend's relationship or another adult's relationship where you would change something, what would you change? And that can help them ID what is unhealthy about relationships, so that they can start to look at patterns and see patterns in the relationships around them and know when there are controlling behaviors happening, or there are emotional abuse or physical abuse happening, and that unhealthy relationships come in all different sorts, and that they, but in order for them to be able to really see unhealthy relationships, they have to understand, similar to how I was talking about with pleasure, that in order to really talk about consent, we have to talk about pleasure. In order to really talk about unhealthy relationships, we have to talk about what healthy relationships look like. We have to talk about what healthy sexuality looks and feels like. How in order to talk fully about refusal skills, we also have to talk about acceptance skills. How do you consent in the end? Oftentimes in sexual health education, pretty much every sex ed curriculum I know of has a section on refusal skills, on how to say no to something you don't want. And we really need to also talk about how to say yes to something that you do want, because focusing on how to say no does a disservice to youth and to their ability to also say yes. And also, it undermines the fact that in any case, no should be sufficient. You don't need to know how to say no. You should be able to just say no. And that should be sufficient to your partner. And there shouldn't be any blame that you didn't say no the right way. That really only sober, enthusiastic yes is yes. I find that sometimes, even when I'm seeing healthy relationship conversations and unhealthy relationship conversations happening, this is another place where we have little hints of blame in our conversations that can come out. And for example, I sometimes will hear adults saying things like, well, sometimes we find that we've put ourselves in bad situations, and any time that those sorts of things are coming out of our mouths, just try to be aware of them. Try to be aware of the times that any amount of blame or shame for being in a situation that's difficult happens, because we all find ourselves in situations that we're like, oh, if I had thought through this, or if I had known something, or things that were just preventable, or were not preventable is what I mean to say. Even as adults, we find ourselves in situations that you just didn't foresee, and we have to go back to how we really need empathy in those moments, and not opportunities to say, how did you get in this situation? Maybe that's something that can happen later as part of prevention, to think through, what are ways to prevent this happening again, but initially we have to really focus on how do we get out of this situation. And then finally, we need to talk about about media usage and sexting. This is a classic place where I hear the phrases "kids these days" or something similar, or the cousin, well, when I was a teen. And we need to be aware of what are the assumptions that we're making about teens' online usage and sexting. For example, I often hear comments about how, well, teens, they're just always on their phones. They just don't know how to be social. And when teens are on their phones, they're being social. They're with their peers. Their peers are on the other end of that phone. So remember that, when this is new media to us, but this isn't shocking. I remember hiding in my bathroom with the cord going into the bathroom for hours, and my mom complaining about me being on the phone. In each generation, we have a way, technology continues to develop, And we have to learn how to respond to the technology without shaming the generation who has the technology. So be aware of what our own assumptions are about sexting. What do we think about why teens sext, or do we think that's a deviant behavior? Again, well, I'll move on and then we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so again, we're going to have a poll. You should still have the access code. So I would like for you just can send in a word on why you think teens sext. If you text in one word, it should show up here. Why is it that you think that teens sext? It's fun. It's the norm. Trendy, pressure, entertaining, acceptance, cool, convenience, curiosity, their peers, everyone's doing it, attention, forbidden, wanted, spice, trendy, awesome. I guess that we're, oh, it's full now. Awesome, it's convenient, communicate, curiosity, absolutely. All right, so now we're going to take a little bit at some research that's been done on why teens say that they sext. And this is done by some researchers who went to colleges and researched what teens were saying, or what youth were saying about their practices around sexting when they were underage. And some people think that some of the research that has been done with actual teens is maybe a little bit less accurate, because teens might not want to out themselves for doing something that is illegal. And so this research was done with people who were over 18, reflecting on when they were younger. And so there have been a couple studies like this that the researchers theorize might be a little bit more accurate, because people might be a little bit more willing to share their experiences when they no longer would be outing themselves as participating in something that is illegal. So these teens said that they sexted in this research. 44% said it was mutual interest between exclusive romantic partners. 34% said to flirt with someone with whom they were romantically interested. Oh, and I've lost a bullet point. Another 15% said that they felt that they were quote-unquote compelled to. And this is where I wish one could go back and do a survey and find out, what does compelled to mean? It's hard to define that once a survey is finished. And then finally, 1% said that it was peer pressure. And so the bottom line is that teens sext because it's a form of communication, as you can see here. And we have to talk about peer pressure, and we have to talk about coercion and manipulation. With young people, that's an important piece of any consent conversation. But I think often adults assume that teens are pressured and forced into sexting. But when teens are reporting about why they sext and about their experiences, they talk much less about peer pressure and much more about communication and it being fun and it being romantic and it being exciting and it being part of their sexual development. Furthermore, in our focus groups around sexting across the state, teens were saying things along the lines, time and time again, we're saying, we really need adults to stop trying to scare us out of this. We need to have adults try to help us navigate this. They said that in many different ways, but that is sort of the summary, my paraphrase of what we heard from them. They talked about how this is very common, this is part of their culture, this is part of their experience, and that they need adults to show up for them. And so that is our call to duty from teens. It becomes really difficult for adults to know what to do because of the way that sexting is currently considered a felony in the state of Colorado and in many other states. And so that makes it difficult. It makes it hard to know how to talk openly with teens. But teens are asking us to. And so we have been called by the people that we serve to find ways to have conversations with them about sexting. So Amy Hasanoff, who's an author who works at UC Denver, or CU Denver, wrote a book called Sexting Panic, which I highly recommend if you're wanting to do any more thinking or research around sexting. And in her book, she suggests these conversation starters. And so one, discuss the state and federal laws around sexting. For one, this would be a very interesting conversation to have right now, considering that there is a whole coalition of people who are trying to change the state law around sexting to be more protective of young people. We would like for the state law, and CCAS is a big piece of this, so I'm sure many of you have a lot of information about this already, but it is important that young people who are in trusting, consensual sexting relationships are protected, and that if someone breaks their trust and shares the photo, that is the criminal behavior. That we don't have, it's not a sexting scandal. It's not a scandal that there's been a crime committed when somebody shares a photo unconsensually. And we have to be really aware of the way that we currently, the victim of that crime could also be tried for the creation and distribution of child pornography, and we have to really protect. A huge piece, as you all know, of sexual violence prevention is protecting and empowering victims. This clearly doesn't protect and empower victims. So it's really important to have conversations around that, like how does the law affect your behavior, and how does the law affect people who have experienced a violation of their trust and have experienced a form of sexual violence on the media. Talk to them about, do they think sexting should be illegal? How do you know if an image you receive is intended to be private or if it's okay to pass on to your friends? What does consent look like over media? We talk a lot about consent in person. We need to also talk about what does consent look like over media. What kind of images are the most and least likely to cause problem if someone distributes them? Does the person's gender make a difference? Is that fair? And what kind of information images do you have online that you think are important to keep private? And how can you protect your privacy? So here are some ideas on ways to start conversations with young people to empower them online. So in conclusion, I've sort of talked all around having conversations with youth, but I'm sure it's a very large topic. And so at the end of the day, these are sort of the three things to keep in mind as you're talking. We need to keep going back to affirmative consent. We have to keep going back to that consent is really about when you know that you want something and that you also want the other person to enjoy the experience. That this feels positive for you and it feels positive for the other person. We also need to be aware of our own assumptions. How are we how are we assuming that teens are interacting, and what are we assuming about their relationships, and are we really listening to what they're saying to us? Are we in some way taking their relationships a little bit more lightly, or taking their experiences a little bit more lightly? And then finally, we have to be strengths-based and positive. We have to focus on what is it that they say that they need, and what are the strengths that we are helping them foster, instead of what are the ways in which we're trying to keep them away from things that we find to be difficult or risky. How are we helping them navigate those difficulties and risk, instead of how are we trying to remove them from those places? So those are sort of the three things to keep in mind as we're talking with youth about relationships and healthy relationships and navigating the online world. And that is all from me, unless you have questions. So if you want to chat questions you are welcome to. Otherwise, thank you for attending, and I will, you can email me with feedback, or you'll also have the survey to give feedback, and you can also visit our website if you are looking for more resources, or you can email me for more resources. So if CICASA people could let me know if any questions come in.
Yes, absolutely. They are asking if the presentation will be available, and the answer is yes. The PowerPoint presentation will be emailed after Ruthie sends us the presentation. We will email that information to you all. Also, just a reminder, if you want to listen to the whole entire webinar again, it will be on our YouTube channel, available by tomorrow.
Thank you.
There's one more question that say about others not necessarily enjoying what they are enjoying. Seems it here
Right.
parents of boys really concerned about two drunk kids and consent, understanding, but what are your tips?
Right. Right. So this is a much larger conversation than 1 hour to all the different aspects of a healthy relationship. But those are great points that talking about it's important. That's where talking about consent being about sorry, I will use words, I promise, eventually. When I was talking about consent being about where both sexual partners are desiring pleasure and valuing the pleasure of their partners. It's a really big deal for a lot of teens. I feel like, or in our conversations, I've heard a lot about wanting to give someone else pleasure, but then not experiencing pleasure yourself. And so it's really important to talk about how this should be a good experience for both parties. That is, consent is a positive experience for both parties, and so it's a great thing to bring up. And then the other thing is talking about the drug, alcohol, and that's a really important conversation to be having with young people, that when alcohol is involved, the person is not giving consent. And that needs to be taught from a very young age, and that is very timely in cultural conversations that take place, and several of the cases that have come up in the last couple of years, how we really have to be addressing that, like, no, it is not okay to say this person's drunk, but clear that I think they're consenting. That is, we really have to talk about drug and alcohol usage and how that impedes a person's ability to consent. Yes, thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you, Ruthie. It seems like
Thank you.
we don't have any more questions, so I would like to thank you. Thank you so much, Ruthie and Colorado Youth Matters, for accepting to help us and provide us with more information about healthy relationships. As always, you have been fantastic providing us amazing information. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. We look forward and invite you to be with us this Wednesday. Let's see, it's March 1st. We will have another webinar, the unauthorized practice of law. So we invite you to be part of that webinar as well. And we will send information and the handouts as soon as Ruthie sends it to us. Please fill out the survey that we have at the end of this webinar. And thank you again to you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.